Hello, everybody out there in the viewer land of the viewers. I hope you're ready for poetry because today is the today is the Annual Winter Poetry Salon. And I am M M De Voe, one of your hosts, and the other one is Christina Chiu, author of Beauty, prize-winning author of Beauty. And we are here. So Parentis is a 501c3. We help writers stay on creative track after they have kids, and that includes poets. And we are super excited. In every January, we get to meet some poets. Our poets this year are from all over the country. This new format lets us reach out to all across the country, and so it's really exciting for us to get to bring people from far-flung places to New York City and interview them. So I'm super excited. While we're waiting for people to gather real quick, I just want to say a quick thank you to Ben Klein, Marianne Lonsdale, Holly Jaffe, Monica Burzich, Dustin Brookshire, Sophia Fascianos, and Billy Kilgore for your donations. Thanks very much. It helps us and it keeps us going, so yay! And also to Niska and Poets and Writers for supporting us. Let's see if anybody has actually followed directions and said hello. Hi, Amy Gretsch. It's good to see you, my Twitter friend. And Marianne from Oakland, yes, California. So yeah, so if anybody else is out there watching and you feel like it, you can drop a line. Hi, Cincinnati. So you can drop a line and say hi, and we will see it, and we will say hi right back to you. And then later on in the broadcast, you can ask questions or make comments, and we will see those too. So, please feel free to interact with us. We are really, really excited to have these three poets. And Christina will tell us a little bit more about tonight. Take it away, lady.
Hello, everyone. So this is our annual poetry night. We only do it once a year, so it's our special moment. And I think you're going to really love this group of people. I know I do. And they're really talented people. And they also just do so much for other people. They're just really incredible. We have three poets. Our first is Jennifer Franklin. She's published 2 full-length collections of poetry, Looming and No Small Gift. She's another forthcoming in 2023. Thank you. Sean Hill is the author of the poetry collections Dangerous Goods and Blood Ties and Brown Liquor. Yoo-hoo! Julie Bloemeke is the author of the debut collection Slide to Unlock, which I've read and absolutely adore. And our first reader is going to be Jennifer Franklin.
You guys should all know that these people from all over the place. Like this is a meeting of the minds here. We have 3 from New York. That's me and Christina and Jennifer. And then Julie is in Atlanta, Georgia right now. And Sean Hill is in Montana, in Helena, Montana. So we are from all over. So it's very exciting. And also, hi, Helene. Hi, Loretta. Hi, Sandel. And everybody else who's out there, hi to you too, even though you didn't say hi to us. All right. I want to hear Julie. Who's first? Jennifer. I want to hear Jennifer read. Let's hear Jennifer read. Yay.
So this is Jennifer. Jennifer Franklin has published 2 full-length collections, most recently, No Small Gift. Her third book, If Some God Shakes Your House, will be published in 2023. Her work has been published or is forthcoming in America Poetry Review, Bennington Review, Boston Review, Gettysburg Review, JAMA, The Nation, Paris Review, Poem a Day on Poets.org, Prairie Schooner, and Rhino. Her poem, Mento Mori Pistachios, was featured in Poetry Society of America's Poetry in Motion, Rhode Island in February 2021. For the past 8 years, she's taught manuscript revision at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, where she serves as a program director. A recent recipient of both a CRCF Literature Award and a City Artist Corps NIFA grant for poetry, she lives in New York City with her severely disabled 21-year-old daughter, her husband, and their rescue pit bull. Everyone, please welcome Jennifer Franklin.
Hey.
Yay!
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much to both of you for the invitation. It's so great to be one of the poets here in your annual poetry salon. And it's wonderful to read with Sean and Julie. Thank you so much for inviting me for this. I'm going to read a poem from each of my collections. So 3 poems, one from No Small Gift, one from my first book, Blooming, and the last one will be from my forthcoming collection, If Some God Shakes Your House. This one is from No Small Gift, which is my most recent collection. It was published in 2018 and it was published by Four Way Books. It's called Hubris. Hubris. We flew to Venice to conceive you. Now I realize the folly to create life in an unreal city, burdened by sinking churches. I wanted you to begin like a gold mosaic, folded in Vivaldi like cherub wings. My punishment is simple. Your legacy mirrors that of obsolete palaces, every lit window wide open to the Grand Canal, all the exquisite rooms empty. And this poem is from my first collection, Looming, which was published by Elixir Press in 2015. And it's called My Daughter's Body. If you saw her, you would think she was beautiful. Strangers stop me on the street to say it. If they talk to her, they see that beauty means nothing. Their sight shifts to pigeons on the sidewalk. Their eye contact becomes as poor as hers. They slip away with varying degrees of grace. I never know how much to say to explain the heartbreak. As her smile sears me, I hold her hand all the way home from the swings. The florist hands her a dying rose, and she holds it gently without ripping the petals, like she does to the tulips that stare at us with their insipid faces, pretending that they can hold my sorrow in their outstretched cups because I knew them before I knew grief. They do not understand that they are ruined for me now. I planted 500 bulbs as she grew inside me, her brain already formed by strands of damaged DNA or something else the doctors do not understand. After her bath, she curls up on me for lullabies, the only time that her small body is still. As I sing, I breathe in her shampooed hair and think of the skeletons in the Musée de Préhistoire in Les Aziz. The bones of the mother and baby rest in a glass case, in the same position we lie in now. They were buried in that unusual pose, child curled up in the crook of the mother's arm. The archaeologists are puzzled by the position. It doesn't surprise me at all. It would be so easy to die this way, both of us breathing our last breaths with nursery rhymes on our open lips, the promise of peaceful sleep.
Mm.
And the last one I'm going to read is a poem from the new collection called If Some God Shakes Your House, which takes its title from Anne Carson's translation of Antigone called Antigonic. And this one is Antigone thinking about her uncle Creon. And it's called Creon Creates His Own Truth. It took me years to see the chaos he wanted to create. He brought blight to the roses and cut them back to claim the cure. All summer, he set small fires with words, but kept his hands clean. He turned us against each other as if we were all invasive species in his groomed garden. As we sat under the golden rain tree, I worried the sliver of moon would incur his wrath for its imperfection. Fear is an addictive drug. When he fits his tight fist around my throat now, I hear his lies as lies. My crime is thinking for myself. Hannah Arendt believed forgiveness is the key to freedom. I cannot agree. Thank you all so much for having me tonight.
Yay, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was awesome.
Jennifer, you have
you.
friends in the audience. Ellen Devlin says hi, and Dante Fuoco, and Helene
Ellen
loves
and
your
Dante,
poems. Yes,
Oh my
Billy
God.
Kilgore and Joe. So yeah, they're
Hi,
friends.
Helene.
We're friends.
Hi, Dustin.
See, it's just like real.
Thanks so much for
Sophia.
coming, guys.
Mhm.
So Jennifer, I want to ask you a question before we move on. With poetry, you put so much of yourself and your experience in it. I'm sure, do people reach out to you and say like, I get it, like, and connect with you that way? Do they ever reach out?
Yeah, sometimes it was interesting that the poem that got the most response of any poem was in JAMA, actually, the medical journal. And it was really surprising for me because it was a poem that actually wasn't directly about my daughter, although she appears in the end of the poem. But it was about a doctor who was killed in Syria in an airstrike. And I never got so many emails as I did from doctors who subscribed to JAMA. But
Wow.
a lot of people who have children with autism, even if I don't know them, they will write to me on Facebook or DM me and just share their experiences. I think that oftentimes the media portrays autism, the less severe cases of autism, I think is what we are more widely used to seeing. And I think that's partially because it helps destigmatize the disorder. So Sesame Street has the character Julia, and she's pretty typical in terms of the spectrum. But I think when people who have a child like my daughter, who's very severe, see poetry or TV show or fiction written about someone like that, they feel more inclined maybe to reach out because it is so rare to have that kind of depiction in the arts.
I can't wait to have this discussion because I have so many questions. But we'll come back to the discussion. Our next reader, everyone, is Sean Hill. Sean Hill is the author of the poetry collections Dangerous Goods and Blood Ties and Brown Liquor. His numerous awards include fellowships from Cave Canem Foundation, Stanford University, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And his poems and essays have appeared in journals including Callaloo, poetryterrain.org, and in nearly 24 anthologies, including Black Nature and Vinanelles. Hill lives in southwestern Montana with his wife, their young son, and dog. Everyone has a dog. Yeah. Everyone welcome Sean Hill.
Hey, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Milda. Thank you for putting this together and having me be a part of this. I didn't, realize this was the one and only annual poetry.
You win.
Yeah, I'm in it. Awesome.
You won the Parentis lottery.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer, for those poems. Thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm going to read one poem from Blood Ties and Brown Liquor. It's a poem about gaining letters, literacy. This book was sort of an exploration of my hometown and the Milledgeville, Georgia, and its history through the lens of a character, Silas Wright. And I sort of had to try some tools of fiction to invent this character and then people around him, and just explore this actual place where I grew up. And I wanted to explore the history, so I put him, a few generations earlier than me. So he was born in 1907. And this is a poem about him learning to write his name, which is significant because African Americans for so long were legally prohibited from learning how to write and read. And also, this poem right now, I'm thinking about it because my son recently has decided he likes cursive and he wants to learn he's learning to write his name in cursive, which seems to be easier for him than print, actually. I don't know. Anyway, so this is a poem about Silas and his gaining letters. Silas Wright at age 7, 1914. Silas Wright follows a fish's wriggle in the shallows between reeds. He scribes the line in his tablet. As much pride in that line as a man in his son. He almost giggles. Still he goes on. The next letters come easy. With this, he'll have more than a mark to bind. Rambling across the page, again and again, in messy rows, on it flows until he goes a little off the page's edge. He smiles. He's surprised to hear when his mouth opens. That's mine.
Wonderful. That was wonderful, Sean.
More
Thank you.
poem.
Thank
I
you.
want
All
another
right.
poem.
All
How about
right.
one more?
All right.
More
All right.
poem, encore.
Yes. All right. So this one is from a collection I'm working on that will hopefully be out from the Milkweed in 2024 or so. I have yet to actually turn the manuscript in. It's this thing.
Yay. We love it. We love it when people premiere things.
Yeah.
Yay.
So this is a poem about seeing my son that first ultrasound.
Oh, I love this poem.
Yay.
Is this hello?
Yes.
Yes.
This is like,
Sorry.
Later. I need a lighter.
Forgive me, Sean. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Hello. She, being the midwife and your mother's longtime friend, said, I see a heart. Can you see it? And on the gray display of the ultrasound, there you were, as you were, our nugget. In that moment, becoming a shrimp or a comma, punctuating the whole of my life, separating its parts, before and after, a shrimp in the sea of your mother, and I couldn't help but see the fast beating of your heart translated on that screen and think and say to her, to the room, to your mother, to myself, it looks like a twinkling star. I imagine I'm not the first to say that either. Unlike the first moments of my everyday, the new of seeing you was the first, deserving of the definite article, moment I saw a star, at once so small and so big, so close and getting closer every day. I pray.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Is that your puppy back there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Tell us about your puppy.
His name is Ford, short for Clifford Star. I was out of town on a gig when my family got him. He is a lovely golden retriever that we weren't sure was a golden retriever at first. He was kind
Until
of
it
like
started barking, and then you're like,
yeah. No, there was a classifieds thing that my wife was like, I think it's a lab golden mix, maybe. That's what they're saying. It's cheap. Can I get it? Actually, she didn't say, can I get it? What she said was, Henry and I are going to go look at a dog. And I was like,
Yes.
I'll be back in a few days. Henry likes the dog. He's picked this one out. Yeah.
Sean, you have
So
some
Sean-
fans out there. Ben and Michael and Dustin all have lovely
Oh.
comments for you.
Thank you.
Very nice. I like this one personally. Beautiful poem, Sean. That last one, holy hell, so beautiful.
Thank you.
Nice.
So that last poem, have you read it to your son, or has he read it?
Oh, he knows about it. He
knows about
like when he knows I have these kinds of things happening. He's like, you're going to read the poem with me in it. And there's actually a few poems with him, and he likes them. And yeah, he likes it. He's in poems.
He's the
Is he-
star for real.
Yeah.
Is he
the
7
star.
now? Is he still 7?
He is 7 now. Well, no, actually, he's 6. He's 6.
Okay.
He's
Nice.
6, and is out with my wife somewhere. They always have fun when I'm doing these things. So,
That's what I do too. I'm like, go to dinner.
yeah. Well, they went to the neighborhood art house theater to get popcorn.
Okay.
All-
Okay, wait. I am
What?
kind of in love with Helena. So first of all, there's this row of mansions that you live in one, and there's this like
Yeah.
art scene. Tell us
Mhm.
about Helena real quick, because then we're going to move on to a different part of the world. But
It's
Montana's art scene is
so Helena is the state capital. It used to be like it was a gold mining town, and so there were a lot of millionaires here, and so there's a mansion district that's across downtown, like on the other side of downtown. Where we live isn't the mansion district, but there are big
It's a
Victorian
suburban
houses.
mansions.
But yeah. You know, it's so there's a bunch of really big brick houses around here. I happen to live in a not really big one, but a nice size one. And
I'm sure that everybody in New York who has an apartment that
Right,
doesn't
right.
have a washing machine is
Right,
probably
right.
like pretty
Yeah.
impressed.
yeah, and there's a movie theater in our neighborhood and some other stuff, and yeah, my wife and son are there getting popcorn, and they also serve beer.
Nice.
Wow,
Nice.
awesome.
Ellen Devlin says that she doesn't think she has ever
That's kinda
forgotten
nice.
any
There's-
of your poems. Just so you know.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful comment.
It's a fun place. It's a fun place. It's a good place to raise kids.
It's cool. Wonderful.
We'll talk more.
We'll definitely talk more. So our next reader is Julie E Bloemeke. She is the 2021 Georgia Author of the Year finalist for poetry. Her debut full-length collection, Slide to Unlock, was also chosen as a 2021 book all Georgians should read, one of only 2 poetry collections selected statewide for that honor. She's currently an associate editor for South Carolina Review. She's also recently served as co-editor for the Dolly Parton tribute issue of Limp Wrist and was a finalist for the Telluride Institute's 2020 Fisher Prize. Her poems, essays, and interviews have appeared in numerous publications, including Writer's Chronicle, Prairie Schooner, Portland Review, Gulf Coast, Echo Theo Review, South Dakota Review, and others. A 2021 fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, she teaches online workshops and is a freelance writer, editor, and guest lecturer. A Toledo native, she currently lives in Atlanta and is the mother of 2 children. Thank you. Everyone, please welcome Julie Bloemeke.
Yay, thank you, Christina.
Hey, Julie.
Thank you so much, Christina and Milda, and Jennifer and Sean. To finally be having a chance to read with both of you is just awesome. I'm like beyond excited, and I don't contain my enthusiasm, Sean, as you could tell. So I am going to read one poem from Slide to Unlock and then a newer poem. But what I love about readings always is there's the synchronicity, because you're not sure what other poets are reading beforehand. And so Slide to Unlock is a love letter itself. So I love, Sean, that you were talking about coming into literacy, but it's a love letter to handwritten letters, but it's also a love letter to places. So Toledo, Venice, actually, London, Paris. So quite a melange of different places. But Slide to Unlock came out March 12th, 2020. So right as the pandemic was taking off. And interestingly enough, it was a manuscript 10 years in the process. And it's all about how we navigate digital spaces and navigate our boundaries of intimacy because of them. So it's poems that are exploring text, email, handwritten letters, face-to-face contact, telephone calls. So I'm going to read the title poem for Slide to Unlock. And there's an epigraph with it. If you have an iPhone, you will know that it used to be the iPhone entry screen. So it's after the iPhone entry screen, 2007 to 2016. Caught in the present tense, we are continuously poised to receive its three-word command, the insistence we open with a fall. Slide. Involuntary, we unknowingly slip into habit, press our print from left to right, unaware of what uninvited light will bow our heads. When this trinity opens our bodies, we respond with our curious hands. We no longer read the words. A call expects an answer, a dark screen, a touch. We are undone by the promise of resolution, temptation. Once we could depend on the corded spiral of miles, delay ourselves with the orbit of finger wheel, change the exchange with a switch hook. We could even leave the rotary to ring, unheard in the absence. Then we housed it for distance, carving an alcove into the wall. Hold the line, we said. Now we are keyed constant, pocketing names, waking to flashes, feeling through the dark before we open our eyes, ourselves carrying the call of possible. There is no signal to prepare us for the arrival of that unresolved name, its bright trick of letters. It arrives after decades of silence. The demand for an answer so pressing it stings of vibration, its invisible stigmata left in our unsuspecting palms, an irrevocable consequence of reach out and touch someone. And then I'm also going to share a newer poem, thank you, which I have to say thank you to Dustin, who's here, because I read this poem and he accepted it for Limperist, and I was so thrilled. But I don't do humor well in poems, and this is one time where I think I might have. But the reason I'm reading it is kind of a contrast because of the pandemic and where we are socially, but it's the poem is navigating anonymous connection and the social synchronicities that we miss by not, having anonymous conversations. And in the title, I'm referring to the Whitney Museum in New York. So there's a love letter to New York too. Poem before the Whitney, and it's for Robert. Without weather, I would not have come to this, settled onto a stool, listening as one bartender banters over bitters, strains the ice, while another comes to me, slides a napkin next to my notebook, and asks what I do. And to hell with it, I think. I am in New York, so I go with the truth and confess. I am a poet. He considers this. Surprises me because he does not say he is one too, doesn't regale me with some conflated syrup of social media verse. He even correctly references Frost's The Road Not Taken versus The Road Less Traveled. He doesn't ask where I've published or joke about a beret. Instead, he knuckle wraps the bar, says he will be back. And I continue to write, which I now know is just to be writing. He returns with my Manhattan and pours himself a shot. We lift our glasses in unison, bring the ring of them together. To the words, he laughs. And after a long pull, he says, it's all on the house. And I put down my pen, because for right now, nothing could be better than to leave it all unfinished. Yay. Thank you all so much.
Oh, what a beautiful love letter.
Absolutely.
Really beautiful. So how do you know when you sat down that this was a poem? Like, did it just come to you? Did you want to create it? did you hear a line, or how did it happen?
The second one, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I would say the first one, they're two very different stories, the title poem versus this one. But I didn't know. That's the funny thing. And it was a confluence of really strange events. I was going to the Whitney to see Yayoi Kusama's chair, that was the reason. And the weather was so bad, and the line to get in was so long. And I was like, I just can't stand in this. So I went over to a bar next door, and I really was kind of writing sort of my way out of my frustration, because I was journaling, actually, and then started getting into a conversation with this bartender. And he was so fantastic and just unexpectedly fantastic. And so I thought, it would be great to write a poem about this. But for me, I never can say that, because as soon as I lock myself in, I'm in trouble. And it actually came to me months later, just recalling the circumstance. And then I started drafting it, and there we are. And I have no idea Robert's last name. I would never know. So maybe someday he'll hear it. I don't know. But it was a great writerly conversation, and to miss all of the writerly cliches was fabulous. So
I actually love what you said about how you can't actually lock yourself in. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know fiction writers have their version. I mean, I know for my sake, if someone asks me what my next book is, I'll say it's a novel because like I'm so scared I'll jinx myself, and then they're expecting this thing, and if I don't deliver, then there's like all this pressure. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's this fantastic interview with Ruth Stone where she talks about the poem being like a freight train, and she's out in the garden, and if she can catch it by the tail, she can write it. And that's often how it feels to me. And poems will come at the strangest times. I mean, I have them. I've done voice recordings of poems, and when I say poems, I should say drafts, right? Because I spend and Ben and Dustin both know this, I spend years editing. The first poem that I published I spent 10 years editing it. So I'm meticulous about that. But anyway, they come in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it's a line, sometimes it wakes me up out of sleep. The best times are when it completely overtakes me and I look at it and go, what is that? I had a draft that I had entered into the computer, and had I not saved the handwritten version, I was wondering whose poem it was. Like, I had no recollection. So I love that feeling, because to me it comes through. But at the same time, there is a way to kind of put out into the universe to say, I would like a poem to come to me, but I'm not going to try to contain it. So I'll give you an example of this. And thankfully, this was Virginia Center for the Creative Arts was where this happened. But for years, I have been saying to the angels and the muse, I would love to write a poem that navigates Neil Diamond. And I could never do it because I have a very intense memory of him as a child. And it would just come back and it would be very sentimental. And I was working on a bunch of other things, but I had my portable turntable with me, and I was playing Neil Diamond, and I was working on something else, and I heard the line, and I'm like, that's it. And so I went off, and it turned into a cento poem in honor of Neil Diamond. So hopefully someone will decide to take that soon. But hopefully that will answer your question just a little bit.
Yeah, it does. That's a wonderful response. Can we bring everyone up for the discussion?
Yay, here we are.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you for reading these awesome poems.
Amazing.
I have one question before, just to get us started. And it's about inspiration, because poets really, like, they don't necessarily have anything to gain except love of the craft, right? Like there's no financial reward, but there is
Pretty much. Yeah.
there is I mean, this wonderful like way of being able to write in a way that just, it's almost like code, and sometimes
it's different when you listen to the, sorry, I'm going to interrupt just because I'm thinking about how when each of you read, it is so different, the amount of energy that the audience is giving back during the reading is like like light years more than when it's from a novel, even if it's like a very complex and word rich novel. Somehow when it's poetry, there's like an extra little sparkle that of like attention that you get, where it's like, I'm not gonna miss anything, I'm gonna get this, like I don't know what it is, but it's kind of great. Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I know. I definitely, that's so like, it feels like it's a code, right? And so if I understand it, I'm like, I got it. I got it. And I think that poetry really resonates for people this way. So what keeps you going? And there are a lot of writers out there. So what would you tell them to keep them feeling inspired and loving, the writing of poetry? Let's start with Jennifer.
Well, I just had a student write to me. She was very discouraged because she had gotten a lot of rejection letters recently. And, I was trying to say back to her, here's a poem that you probably already know by W.S. Merwin, which is called Berryman. And it's a poem that basically says, if you need to know if what you're writing is any good, then don't do it. Don't become a poet. Don't be a poet. Don't be a writer. You're going to die not knowing. And so it's a poem that I always share with people, because you have to keep reminding yourself of this. And rejection is just part of the process of being a poet. Sylvia Plath said, I love my rejection letters. They show me that I try. You send out hundreds and hundreds of poems and you get a fraction of them. Szymborska said that she was asked, why didn't you publish more poems in your lifetime? She won the Nobel Prize, and she said she didn't publish more because she had a trash can in her house. So I think that my ideas are somewhere in using all of those together. Mine is somewhere in the middle of all of that. I started writing poetry when I was in high school. It was provoked by the tragic death of my favorite teacher, and he was 26 years old when he died in a car accident. And I couldn't, I was 15, I just turned 15, and I couldn't process it, and I didn't understand. And so I just turned to poetry as a way to try to make sense of it, as a way to try to commemorate his life and how much he loved poetry and literature. And it just went from there. And it's always been there to help me through the worst times of my life. It really has been my lifeline.
It's amazing.
Sean, how about you?
That's sort of in your question.
Sorry, I'm just going to distract real quick. Ben Klein said, because poetry is the feeling or the photo, and fiction is the story or the movie. I thought it was really cool, and I didn't want to scroll off without everybody noticing.
That is so true.
Right. Yeah.
Go on, Sean. Take it away.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the story I always tell, and the story that's true, is that I was one of those kids who loved language. I was a word nerd. I read the dictionary. I read fantasy books and all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. And I thought I was going to be a writer. I really did. I thought I was going to grow up and be a vet, and take care of animals, because I still love animals. And I was going to be like James Herriot, except I was going to be like Tolkien instead of James Herriot, and do all this fantasy writing stuff. And but I could never write more than some fantasy vignette. I didn't quite understand plot, and I think it had something to do with my temperament. I feel like there's a certain temperament that some poets have. That's just there's a way in which you observe the world and you can describe things, but it's not driven by let me think about conflict and this next thing happens. The next thing happens. How is my character going to get out of this? I don't have that exactly. I can kind of work toward that, but it wasn't until college when I was all these failed vignettes. Somebody's write a poem. You should try that. And I tried to write a poem, and I was oh, I think I just wrote a poem. And so that's kind of how I fell into poetry, as a mode of exploration and discovery. And so now I'm still trying to figure out fiction and write like science fiction poems now. But yeah,
Cool.
Can you
we'll see.
talk a little
We'll
bit
see how
about
that goes.
how to keep people inspired? What
Um,
is your little bit of advice?
I think stay curious. Like I'm
Mhm.
always so. I have this class that I teach that's sort of out of kind of my practice of like writing research-based things, and by research I mean I think just find out more about what you're curious about. And like dangerous or blood ties and brown liquor came about because um, a classmate of mine was like, "You should write about the women in your family." I was like, "Huh, I hadn't really thought to be curious about them." And I interviewed my grandmother about her life, and then I was just like, "Oh, I really need to find out more about this history of this place where I grew up and don't really know anything about." And that dragged me in. And I'm still doing that. I'm still always asking the question, like, where are the Black people? Because that's like a story that's not really always talked about. I mean, I think nowadays people are beginning to talk more and more about like Black people in American history, but like, um, yeah,
It must be very interesting in Montana to be.
yeah.
I mean, it can't be. Is it? I don't picture Helena as being extremely diverse.
No, like Montana is, I think, the least Black state in the nation. Like, I
Wow.
think it's like 0.6% African American or something like that.
Wow.
Um, yeah, there aren't a lot of Black folk here, but there were like York came with Lewis and Clark out here, right? Back in the day.
Mhm.
There have been Black people here. Buffalo soldiers, those soldiers that were in the U.S. Army after the Civil War, who were African Americans who stayed there. They were stationed in various places, usually on the frontier, um, because in part they couldn't be stationed near like in forts near white folks
Wow.
in the South, particularly.
Yeah.
And so there's a fort out here, Fort Missoula, where they were stationed, and there's a story about some of them who were stationed there. There was a group of them were tasked with testing out the technology of bicycles and what military applications bicycles as transportation could have, and they they rode bicycles from Missoula, Montana, down to Yellowstone, and then they decided we should try to ride these bikes from like kind of backtracking the Lewis and Clark thing from Fort Missoula to St. Louis, and they rode bicycles across the nation in
Wow.
Wow.
I think 1895 or 97 or something like that.
Was it the two different wheel size bicycles or the
No, it wasn't penny
normal bicycles?
farthings. It was
Okay.
normal bike, but like these were not. I mean, I took a bike that I bought like in 2005 into the bike shop, and the guy's talking to me about modern bicycles. So like these are not modern bike. These were like I think they were like the wheels were solid instead of they weren't inflatable or something like that. They were just they were rough,
Wow.
and they also they weren't driving they weren't riding on roads. They were like a lot of the time they were like on these like dirt roads and dealing with mud and like just it was yeah it was a lot.
Wow.
But yeah, but it was also in the newspapers. Like people were like kind of excited about these guys coming riding across the country. Yeah, and I'm learning more about the folk who were here, and I'm writing poems about them too.
Cool.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Thank
yeah.
you. Julie, how about you?
Okay, so we've been on this journey. Remind me of the question again.
So we're talking about inspiration,
Yes.
and for you, what is your inspiration, but also what's a little bit of advice that you would give those poets out there?
Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, it's really difficult to answer that succinctly, right? I mean, for me, inspiration has come from poets that I've worked with, and Jane Hirschfield in particular, because she believes that poetry is the conjuring of empathy, which I love that as a way of looking at poems. And then also, by contrast, I studied with James Dickey at the University of South Carolina, who was known for saying that poets, they don't tell the truth, they make the truth, which I also love. So I have been writing since, oh my goodness. I mean, I like to say in some ways before I was even born. but actually writing since I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And I have a 3-ring notebook, and I would write these, what I called poems at the time, and actually go back and revise them. And I have dates where I'd revise them. And so the more I was reading, the more I was learning, and even learning things at a young age. Of course, a lot of what I was inspired by was what I was reading. So I'm, it's Nancy Drew and Laura Ingalls Wilder, that kind of thing. So some of them are kind of cringeworthy to look back on, but it was already the building of my artistic process. And how do, I think the other part of the question was, how do we, inspire others with that? Or I think part of the beauty of poetry is being able to not, the I is never the I completely. You can take on persona, you can take on voice, you can take on, history and that kind of thing. And it's really kind of amazing to interconnect when you're doing that in a poem. I mean, I'm sure Sean could probably speak to this too, but I have a poem, interestingly, about Walter Hunt, who invented the safety pin, which might not sound remarkable, but he sold the patent for only $500. And when you think about what had happened had he held on to that, and he actually was trying to help the invention or push along the invention of the sewing machine, but he was morally conflicted because he felt he would take people out of their jobs. So it was just this, and so very little is known about him, but I stepped into that to try to write this poem about him, imagining what that moment was like when he had no money, and he was actually, one of his creditors, kind of as a joke, gave him a piece of wire and said, see what you can do with this. And that's how he came up with the modern safety pin. Now, there's ancient safety pins too, if you go back to Roman culture, but nevertheless, that idea, that pressure that he must have felt, so that kind of thing. So, and I'm always encouraging my students, same thing, to try to take on a different voice. You have to have a sense of wonder. The minute that you lose your sense of wonder, you're in trouble. So
that is so true.
That is so true.
I think that's true with fiction too. I mean,
Yeah.
any writing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we see for others.
Yeah.
Like we see and then we show, but we have to see first. Like,
oh, I'm sorry, my friend Sarah's here, and
Oh.
she's known me since 7th grade, so she knows.
awesome.
I mean, she knows those early poems. Oh, the poems with the roses. It's bad. But anyway.
That's gorgeous. Hi.
Hi.
That's really fun. Do you guys also have, Sean and Jennifer, do you also have quotes? Julie was just throwing out quotes like so easily, like these are things that inspire her. Do you guys also have sort of an arsenal of quotes that just sort of feed you? I bet you do. And I want to hear them. Because they're great. They're like, I'm like writing them down. The I is never the I, really. What? That's awesome. Like, I want more.
Well, that goes back to Dickinson, right? When
Yes.
Dickinson, who said, when I say I, it is a representative of the verse.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And to be fair, because of Zoom, I have things taped up all over my wall. So I'm looking as I'm talking to you, because I have a terrible memory for that kind of thing. I mean, I know the James Dickey one, but otherwise I just like to look because it reminds me. So don't feel too much pressure in that regard.
I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I wish I had a quote for you, but no.
Oh, here's Mary Ann Lonsdale wants to know, Christina, this is for you, I think. It's a great mix of poems and poets. How did we choose the poets for this reading? Christina? How did we choose these?
We always get a lot of poets who, we only do this once a year, so we have a lot of poets who want to read with us. But I love to find people who fall into, two categories. They are exceptional writers, and their work is beautiful. And more than that, they do a lot in the world of literature to help it keep going. And it's really nice to see people doing that. And it's just nice that your students can see you guys now, and the Hudson Valley Writers Center, which Jennifer is the director. People watch and they see you read. Like until they see you read, you're just someone who does the office stuff. But then when they see you read, it's like, oh my God, she's a poet, you know? And I think that that's really incredible, and really important. So I usually book about at least a year out. So I think yeah, these authors knew over a year ago, maybe 2 years even. So we already have 4 authors for next year. So it's you know, it's best for me to arrange everything early, because then I can get a really good mix of people who I think will work well together, and people who have a lot to share, like can actually talk and love to share, what they know. And so it's a combination of all of that. I hope that answers your question.
She's not going to probably say yes, but she might. It's the funny thing about chat. They ask questions and then they just listen. It's super amazing.
All right. So can we, all right. So the poet, I think, Sean, you touched on this. Poets are so like different than fiction writers, right? Like I once interviewed Lee Young Lee, and he said something like, fiction writers are evil. And I was like, what? What's going on here? And he explained that, like, you guys, you just let the words go. You just, barf out words, basically. And poets, we actually are so careful. Every word matters. And I just thought, wow, that's such an interesting way to look at it. What's your take?
I don't think fiction writers are evil. I love reading fiction. Like, I love I get what he's saying too. I like Lee Young Lee, and yes, but like no, so the 4 temperaments of the poet, and it's like he has this idea in this essay that he's like, poets have these 4 things they do. They either are really great at imagery, or they're great at like music and sort of like connecting sounds together, or they're great at like structure and sort of figuring out how a poem progresses and like what kind of form it should take, or they're great at narrative. And he's like, if you have all 4 of these things, you're awesome. Basically, you're Shakespeare. Otherwise, you're trying to figure out how to get these things together. And the way he kind of parses them out too is that some of those things are limiting and some of them are limitless. Like, so the imagination and being associative and making imagery is kind of a limitless thing. You just kind of can keep going, right? Structure and narrative are limiting because you have to have a beginning, middle, end for a narrative. And structure is like making a shape, right? And then what was the other one?
Music.
Yeah. So anyway, so those are sort of the way he thinks about those things. And I think of those 4 things, I have narrative the least. Is what like I didn't understand this about myself. Like you grow up reading stories, but like understanding how to produce them, like I can read stories, short stories, novels. I watch like the narrative of our time, like video. Like I understand how these things are structured. I talk to my son about how they're structured. I can talk to my son about, like, this is a scene, we're going to watch this until the next scene, then we have to go, this is what a scene is, there's a narrator here, blah blah blah, those things. But like actually being able to sit down and like look at a blank page and have something like that happen for me has not really been easy. And so I think when someone said write a poem, and me sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do exactly, but let me try this, and something happening that felt like it resolved itself, was a breakthrough for me as a writer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wonderful. Julie?
So, well, first of all, yeah, the thing about fiction, but what's so fascinating to me is the first like writer crushes that I had were writers that could do it all. So Margaret Atwood was one of the first, right? I was fascinated by the fact that she could write fiction, she could write poetry, and she could write nonfiction. And then she was killed it. Yeah. I mean, she killed it in interviews. It was just everything. So I have to admit, I'm kind of fascinated by where those intersections are and how we can kind of navigate them. You know, I just finished Katie Kitamura's The Intimacies, and there are lines in, I mean, I haven't read, actually, Christina, I haven't read fiction since I read your book, but there are lines in it that are so incredibly oriented toward poetry. I was just blown away. And yet she's driving this narrative at the same time, like how she's able to balance the, you know, both a subtlety and a depth of emotion. I was just completely blown away. So now I want to look at it from more of a craft perspective, even though it's fiction, to say, okay, how did she do that? And how can I play with that in the poem? And I think that's some of what we should all be doing, really, because as soon as we get hermetic and we're only reading poetry, we're not expanding the range, right? And so I enjoy reading nonfiction, I enjoy fiction, but I also enjoy reading odd things, like self-help things and horoscopes, and because it kind of forces me out of my comfort zone in this weird way, not from a writing perspective, but just from a like a mental perspective and an energetic perspective. And I practice a lot with meditation, so all of those things kind of factor in for me. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you. Jennifer, how about you? And then we have a question for all of you.
Yeah, I love reading prose as well. That was my undergraduate degree was in modernist fiction. So I read a lot of Jean Rhys and Virginia Woolf. And whenever I'm feeling any kind of writer's block at all, I usually will go back to novels in order to replenish the well and get inspired again. Whereas, you know, I read poetry day in and day out and love it. But if I'm feeling stuck with something, I always go back to novels. And since I write a lot of persona poems and poems about myth and ekphrastic poems, it tends to be very fulfilling to read, you know, to see how fiction writers use character and use persona. So that can be really helpful as well, especially if you're having writer's block.
Well, that's really great.
Definitely.
Do you want to read that question, Milda?
Sure, here you go. Ben Klein would like to know, for all three writers, in these unusual times, do you find yourself drawn more to the political, social, or the personal, nostalgic in your work? Thanks for asking, Ben.
That's a great question. Why don't we start? Sean, why don't you start?
Yes, both. I mean, I'm writing this book that's kind of thinking about the ways in which poetry and nonfiction come together. It's kind of a hybridy piece. And I'm also writing about my son and being in Montana at this time in our country's history. So all of these things are coming together. So it is the personal, the nostalgic, the political, and the social all at once. Because this is nothing new, though it is new, right? You know, I have not been surprised by much, but I am shocked by everything.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That's a good way of putting it.
Really is.
Yeah. I do think that the personal is always political. I mean, whether you say something or you don't say something, you're saying something, right? But I think compared to maybe 20 or 30 years ago, if you write about political issues, it's more accepted in poetry as art. Whereas I think in the past, there would be more sense that like, oh, that's like a polemic, or, you know, I mean, you're just trying to bash us over the head with your politics, you know? And I think we've kind of evolved to this place where, you know, it is like, you know,
poetry can hold so much. Like a poem, a poem is bigger on the inside.
And it's like so intersectional, like there's so many aspects, right? And it's everything crisscrosses, and, you know, even fiction now, more and more, you know, you see shorts and you see short shorts and then you see short shorts. And some of those are like poems. How do you know, differentiate?
I would love to see like a Coke Pepsi challenge between narrative flash fiction or narrative poetry and extreme flash fiction. Like, I want to see like side by side, is this fiction or is this poetry? Like, and see if like what the writer thought when they were presenting it, as opposed to what the readers assume from reading it. Because
Right, like how everyone claims Lydia Davis.
Yeah, they all were like, prose poets
claim her, and
yes.
the prose writers claim her.
Yes, exactly. Millet Arts writes, I love the idea of poets and writers talking to their kids and asking questions about works in progress. Visual artists and performing artists, theater, musician, composition, etc., seem to have a much easier way to invite kids in as the work is being created in the studio, on the stage, or on a CD or computer. Writers have to really want the inclusion of their kids, like seeing their work, I guess, or interacting with their work. Do your kids at all have any interaction? I know that Jennifer, you use your daughter as subject matter. I mean, that's a terrible way to say it. I didn't mean to put it that way, but you know what I mean? Like that relationship is deeply formative in the creation of a lot of your work. Talk about that a little bit, if you would all. Just a little bit, like how your family fits into your writing lifestyle. Right. And Jennifer, also, how the heck do you get things done? Because you have a full-time job and a very neat hands-on child, and you're a widely published poet. So let's talk about this. Let's put this out there. How is this? How?
Right.
Miracle
well,
worker?
it is difficult. And for a long time, I did it all by myself because I was a single mother for many years. But for the past 5 years, I've had a great, who's now my husband, doing this with me. So it's much easier now with Rich. Shout out to Rich. But yeah, it's difficult. Actually, COVID has made it much more difficult. She was out of school for 1 year and 1 month before the vaccines. So that was extraordinarily challenging. But I've been able to work from home, doing work in the center, teaching on Zoom, all my great students who are here tonight. Thank you for coming. So it's, it's difficult. And I mostly write in the middle of the night when everyone else is sleeping.
Oh. How about you, Julie?
Well, it's interesting because my son is studying computer science at LSU, and my daughter is more geared toward engineering. But I do.
They want to pay rent.
Yes, I do, though. However, I struggle very much to write poems around them. Anytime I've tried, it's become very sentimental for me. I actually only published my first poem about my children in the Villanelle issue of Limperist magazine, and it's a poem that I worked on, I think, for about 15 years. But there are other ones that I kind of go back to here and there, but I really do struggle with this sentimentality because for me, I like to push against it as much as I can without tipping over, right? But I do like to involve them in the process, not a ton, but sometimes I'll run, say, hey, I'm working on this. What do you think? And most of the time it's like, they'll be kind about it, but like, okay, Mom, enough poetry, this sort of thing. And then occasionally they give me challenges. My son, years ago, and he probably has forgotten this, but he asked me to write a poem with the phrase edible fire. So I've been trying to work on that, and I actually have a draft of a poem now that has that. So hopefully it will find itself and find its footing. But with Slide to Unlock, I felt it was extremely important for me to be conscientious because there are a lot of poems in there that push boundaries about fidelity and commitment and relationship and where lines are with all of that. And so I did talk to them, and of course their dad read the whole book, knew before it came out. But I did talk to them about that because I wasn't sure, how folks would respond. And I feel like bringing them into the process, is important. And I do, cherish their feedback. And, again, like I said, not for every poem, but for certain ones, for sure.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
My kid actually, both my kids, well, one is into computer science and math, so he's goner. And my other son hates to read. So it's been like torture for me because neither of these kids care about literature. And my younger son won't, I have to force him to pick up a book. It's awful. Instead, he's like gaming all day, and I wish he would find something. Like when I found writing, it like lit me up, right? So I knew I'm a writer, even though I spent many more years people telling me you're not a writer, and believing it. But then, yeah, I just always came back to that. I think I'm a writer.
Yeah.
So what are some of the poets who have influenced you the most? Julie, you want to start?
Oh, wow. I mean, I love this question because the list is long, but it also kind of changes day by day. I don't know if you all feel this, right? Like you have these sort of love affairs, and you'll be connected to one poet, and then you kind of go, sort of go back and you forget and this kind of thing. But I would say, I mean, certainly Jane Hirshfield for sure, because I went to Bennington. Also, Jane Kenyon was a huge influence for me. And I don't feel like she gets enough attention. Her work is really amazing. James Dickey, obviously. And there's a book coming out about him, actually, with Mercer Press in the spring. And it's looking at his literary legacy, which is really interesting because, a lot of people remember him for kind of all the scandal that surrounded him, but there's not been enough critical scholarship on his poetry. So it's going to be a fascinating book. But I was fortunate enough to study with him, and not just his poetry, but also his philosophy about what the poet is and what the poet does, which is fantastic. I just recently read Kai Coggin's new book and Stephen Rain's new book. So, those are some of the contemporary folks entering in. I'm also teaching a class where I'm drawing on Ellen Bass's Indigo. So she's a big influence. Gosh. And I know I'm gonna switch off and be like, oh, and I'll think of 15 more people. But I also like to go back. That's contemporary, but also Charlotte Mew was a big influence on me too. And again, a poet that only ever published 27 poems, but had a fascinating life, and the way that she uses recurring image and metaphor in her work has been extraordinary. So, and probably Rethke and Randall Jarrell too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, how about you?
I think like one of the first poets was Yusef Komunyakaa. Like sort of trying to figure out what poetry was, and Rita Dove, and around the same time I found Marilyn Nelson, Marilyn Hacker, and some of the poets that I like. I've studied with Kevin Young, and his work was and is still sort of influential. Edward Hirsch and Mark Doty were teachers at Houston, and I also got to work with Marie Howe there. And Adam Zagajewski. And then I like some of the poets that I like met at various places have been influential, like Poetry Community, right? Like Jericho Brown, Camille Dungy, Douglas Kearney, Ahmad Johnson, and then just there's a long list.
We're going to make a whole bookshelf in our bookshop that is just poetry books recommended by this particular panel. Poetry authors recommended by.
Yeah.
How about you, Jennifer? And then I have another question I really want to make sure.
I have two.
I know, right? It's like, oh, we have so much to ask you. Okay.
There's so many great poets. For me, I'll also mention my teachers who were really influential. And that would be Richard Howard and Lucy Brock-Broido and C.D. Wright.
You went to Columbia.
And Michael Harper. So those people, and then of course Louise Glick for me. She's my favorite. Marie Howe, Mark Doty, Nick Flynn, and Carolyn Forche. John Murillo right now, who's my pressmate at Four Way Books, is incredible. So many people, Brian Comey Dempster. It's really amazing to be a poet during this time period and to be a literary citizen in this time period and be able to host readings and go to readings with all of these amazing poets. And the one silver lining of the pandemic has been all of the Zoom readings and readings like this, where we can come together from all over the country and hear each other's work and talk to each other. That has been a lifeline.
Yeah.
It really
Definitely.
is. That actually jumped. I want to jump in because I know that so the Hudson Writers Guild, what you run, and then I know Cave Canem, and you guys all are very active in your communities, as Christina booked you partly because you are very active in communities. Can you talk about community among poets and how that helps you, if it hinders you at all? I want to sort of jump off of Dante's question in the comments. Was he said, most people that he meets kind of cringes at poetry as a genre, although he felt that poetry is much more receptive to experimentation or hybridity than any other writing form. So that whole like moving forward and being very exciting and experimental, and yet people are like, oh, I don't know, poetry, man, that's kind of poetry, right? So what does it mean to you to have community? Where did you find community, and how has it elevated you? Has it hurt you? Like, have you been in a workshop that was like, killed me, stifled me? Like, let's talk community a little bit.
That was a
question, right?
Right. I was in one workshop that I was like, oh my gosh, this is not great. And what saved me was community. Like, I had gone to Cave Canem, and so I was able to contact those people outside of the workshop and say, like, this is what's happening in my life right now. And they were like, no, it's not you, it's them, and you're good. The work is good. So just keep doing what you're doing, and let's keep talking and be in community. And like, I went to Breadloaf, I went to Cave Canem. I ended up like working as a coordinator for a writers conference up in this little town I lived in northern Minnesota, Bemidji, Minnesota. And then now I direct that conference. I'm the director of the Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference at Bemidji State University.
Hey.
And I get to sort of help build a community, and it's been an awesome experience. I've been doing that since 2012, 13. And I love like being able to sort of help in other people's projects, like editing things or whatever, however I can. It's like, I think this is like the best work I get to do. And I'm glad I get to do it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Julie?
Oh, I mean, again, another question we could spend a lot of time on. I have just felt absolutely inundated by generosity with poets, honestly. And there have been so many communities that have kind of intersected in different and really beautiful ways. I mean, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Christina, as you know, has been absolutely instrumental in finding support, not just with poetry, but also just writing in general, artists in general. And there's such a beautiful cross-section of genre and medium and form and discipline, and the way those all come together. And so my community is poetry, but it's also visual artists, it's also fiction writers, it's photographers, and I very much enjoy writing ekphrastic poems, which we've touched on a little bit. But having that kind of conversation on multiple levels, multiple genres is fantastic. So that's one. I have to say, being in Atlanta has been spectacular, because Atlanta is this incredible coming together of, you have academic poetry, you have performance poetry, you have spoken word, we have, national Grand Slam champs here. And then there's an amazing LGBTIQ community. And I'm an LGBTIQ ally, and have to say, folks like Colin Kelly, Dustin Brookshire, Ben Klein. I mean, they've all just stepped in and been so creative and so generous. And these are the kind of things where I think all of us probably have experienced this, but there are people that are doing things constantly behind the scenes, donating time, donating money, donating resources, being sure that folks that don't have access to opportunities because of finances, they're stepping in and helping them out, but quietly. And I just love it. There are, and I won't even say names, but I mean, I've witnessed this over and over again. And I think it's a phenomenal way that writers kind of look out for each other and offer those sorts of opportunities. And then also, interestingly enough, because I am from Ohio, I've been really embraced by Ohio writers, which I think is fantastic because I'm here in Atlanta. But my love letters to Toledo in Slide to Unlock have also meant that I've been embraced by opportunities to read and network with Ohio writers, which is fantastic. And then the other one would be, working for South Carolina Review has been a really fantastic experience too, because we're all kind of coming in from different sort of modalities and disciplines, and working on an issue together and being able to collaborate on that has been really fantastic. So
Wonderful.
That's the small answer.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I have one more.
But I want to hear what Jennifer has to say about
Oh,
community.
yes. Okay. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, just at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, that's one of our biggest priorities, is to make sure that all of the students there and all of the teachers and readers who come feel that sense of community and always have each other as a support system. We have submission Sundays where one of our great students, M.A. Scott, leads the students in figuring out where to send poems. And prose writers can go as well if they're interested in sharing ideas about where to submit short stories. And then in our classes, it's such an important part of what we do to make sure that the feedback is positive and encouraging, and that all of the students there feel that they're supported by their classmates and their other teachers, because it's so hard, and it's such an isolating thing to be a writer sometimes. So we all really need to have that community. And like Sean was saying about having the Cave Canem people to use as a sounding board when things get rough in other areas, it's really useful to always have those people to go back to.
Exactly. I'm going to let Christina have the last question because we are
Yay!
over time, but it's very exciting. But I did want to mention that if you are out in the audience and you are a parent and a writer, we have communities also. So we have accountability groups that meet on little Zooms like this, but they're not public, they're private, and people really get to know each other. And it is cross genre. So you can be a poet or a writer. We have somebody writing a musical. We have all kinds of really cool genre. We have nonfiction people that are writing, large nonfiction projects, or even just trying to write essays. But everybody has to be a parent. They do not have to have an infant, but they can. But we like to mix it up, all the different age groups and all of the different experience levels, because we find that in a room where somebody knows more about one thing, somebody else will know something else. Like you might be, a National Book Award finalist and know everything there is to know about, writing, whereas you have a baby and it's like, oh, what do I do? And the person with 4 kids who has never published anything will be able to sort of tell you it's okay, it's going to move on, you just keep writing. How do I send out to an agent? And it's just a beautiful mix. And so we do welcome you to become a title member so that you can participate in that. They're lovely, lovely groups. Christina, ask the last question.
So this is a thought that I had a while ago. I remember when I was in my late teens, I read The Bell Jar, and I up to that point I had loved Sylvia Plath's work. I mean, I just adored her work, right? And there was this one moment in Bell Jar where she disparages Chinese people, like she talks about their eyes or something, and it was like, suddenly I was like, I don't like her anymore. Have any of you had an experience like that or something similar? because she's a great, there's no doubt about it, right? But I feel so conflicted.
Yeah, I have that problem with Eliot because he was always one of my favorite poets, and then you find out more about his beliefs, and it is difficult to then look at the writing in the same way.
How about you, Sean?
I end up being kind of like a yeah but person. Like I will still like this despite them enjoy the work, I suppose, is how I end up coming at things.
Yeah. Julie?
Oh, you asked that question and instantly it came to mind. I remember reading She's Come Undone, Wally Lamb's book, and I was so appalled at the way that he described. There was a scene that involved rape, and then he was describing women's pleasure after that. And I remembered thinking, this is someone who has zero understanding, so I just found it really frustrating. I mean, I enjoyed the rest of the book, but that was kind of a moment for me of saying, how do we write, from another person's perspective? So, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of my last quirky question. Thank you so much.
You guys have been amazing, and we aren't going to let you go. So hang on a minute. I just want to tell everybody who's watching this the first time through, and everybody who's watching this on the playback, I'm talking to you in the future, in the past, in the whatever time you're seeing me. And I just want you all to know that you're invited to come back on Tuesday, February 8th. We have storytelling, and it is with Lily B., Regina Stoops, and Devon Sandiford. And they're going to talk about like being in the moth and talking and doing oral storytelling. It should be really, really amazing. They should be very intriguing and probably tell us good stories, we hope. And so, I mean, just thank you so much to our poets and of course, Christina, for choosing them and for coming here. And everybody, come and visit penparentis.org and you will get to find a whole bunch more stuff about what we do. We do this once a month, but we also do other stuff. So come and check us out. And we will see you all next month. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thank you all for being here and listening.
Thank you.